Hi, this is Liqian Ren, Director of Modern Alpha Wisdom Tree ETFs. Welcome to China of Tomorrow podcast series, where we navigate China, India, Japan, and the broader emerging markets with members of Wisdom Tree and other industry leaders. Hi, today is July 22nd, 2024. Thank you. I'm going to touch on China's very important meeting last couple of days. Interestingly, it's called the Central Committee of the Communist Party of China, third plenum. And usually the way it works is China runs on the 5-year political calendar, and between the 5 years, there will be 7 important meetings, and the first 2 focuses on the appointments, who gets what job. The third is one of a very important policy communique. And the way it works is you get a communique, which is kind of summary. You get some explanation by the communique, and then you get a resolution laid out a little bit more detail. But then ultimately, all the details are going to be by various departments and then wrote it out. So, interestingly, it coincides with U.S. GOP nomination time meeting. And this year there was this joke that, it was kind of accidentally President Biden dropped out. Clearly, people in China is also paying a lot of attention to the U.S. election because whatever U.S. does, whether the Fed, the president, it impacts the rest of the world, and China is, probably at the top of being impacted by U.S. policies. So first, quickly touch on, I've tweeted significant updates on this, the third plenum meeting, and I think if you want, much more detailed references, you can find those from my tweets. But essentially, I will say the general, maybe some of the people are a little bit disappointed because there's no drastic, bold initiatives. But I think if you listen to my podcast or following me, I've been generally not dampening down those expectations. I think currently China is going to move in a very stability prioritized policy framework. And that framework is very much where, President Xi's style. So I think that's a good baseline. But it's not without policies. So first, short term, the government will stimulate to meet the growth goal this year, which is 5%. So because the economy has kind of visibly slowed down in the last couple of months, so you expect a little bit more stimulus than the no stimulus scenario. In terms of that, you will see that the government is giving out consumption coupons, giving out, if you set up a new company or a small business, you get a tiny bit, maybe like a couple $1,000, or I would say maybe like $1,000 or $2,000 subsidy if you're a young person or college students who couldn't get a job, but you are thinking of trying out a new business. So there are some of those stimulus, very targeted stimulus coming to making sure. And then also the PBOC just reduced the very short term interest rate by 10 basis points. So I think the PBOC we talked about last episode, China's monetary policy is very different from the Fed. The PBOC's number one priority is making sure the exchange rate is stable. So they are not, not going to do the kind of reduced interest rate. And I think China, the top leadership, is not yet convinced. So I think the main thing is of this third plenum is very short-term, some stimulus to make sure this year's growth target is met, regardless whether you question China's
top line growth rate, but there are some numbers, some of the PMI number, the retail sales. There are some numbers, electricity usage. Those numbers are much more indicative of China's economy than the GDP growth or even inflation. I think the inflation right now is very, very low, which is suggestive of very low demand. And the interest rate on housing, the mortgage rates is getting close to less than 3%. Just shows how few people wanting to take on risky investments. So for those, the government will do a little bit stimulus just to meet the 5% goal. You can dispute the 5%, but essentially I will say to meet the goal so that it's not negative growth. And then the medium term, we should expect to see some loosening of rural residents, how they could get public benefits in the cities. For people who are not familiar with China, China runs a quite discriminatory two-track citizenship registration system. I knew this very well because my mom was a rural citizen and my dad was a city citizen. And when I was born those years, you go with your mother. So I and my brother both ended up as a rural citizen, which means we don't get to enjoy a lot of the benefits that city people enjoy, such as health insurance or social insurance or education. So again, we will see some, but it's not like Big Bang just 1 year. That thing is going to take, I think, a decade to move, but we will be able to see some movement in that area. And the second area we will see some movement is tax reform. China's local government is really short in money because of the lack of real estate land sale revenue. So there will be a little bit talk of consumption taxes, sales taxes that will go to the local government so that they have some money to replace some of the sales of land. But I think for now, it's definitely not enough. So you will see a lot of talk on the basic wage of local government is covered, like teachers, but they usually have about 20-30%, depends on the region. Some of it could be 50%. Those money came from so-called bonus pool, and then that pool of money usually is funded by local government revenue, like land sale. And since the land sale is not coming, as nowhere clear and nowhere as much as before, so that portion of the salary for a lot of local government employees, and keep in mind teachers are also local government employees. So you will see that a lot of those government workers, their salary has been reduced. On the other hand, they still enjoy quite significantly higher job stability than than other than private businesses. So there are still a lot of college graduates or trying to get into civil service through tests. So that still continues, which again, another way to show that the private business sector is not doing as well. And then the third, I think, is probably so-called like a unified government, unified market. China, it's a huge country. If you think about it, it's similar size to the U.S. and different provinces, so many different languages. They have different systems. Sometimes you can have insurance from one province, but you couldn't really use in another province. So there will be some reform in those areas. But again, it explored then in the very long run, it explored 12 areas China wants to reform. And give you one example, it's China doesn't really have a good personal bankruptcy. I think people here in the U.S. it's very difficult to understand that in China, if you take on the debt, and then you couldn't make money, then you couldn't get personal bankruptcy and get out of that debt easily. So essentially, you are obligated to pay back the debt like almost forever in that kind of a situation. It's quite difficult because if you don't pay them back, then they took away your privilege of riding on the subways or the high-speed train. If you are on those lists, like the credit deficient list, it's pretty difficult life, I would say. So China is thinking of getting a personal bankruptcy kind of procedure going, like how you can allow people to go personal bankrupt and have start from the beginning. I know this is in that sense, China is still very emerging market, maybe slightly better than some other emerging market, but if you understand that. And another area China is really exploring is to increase the education. There's 9 years of mandatory education, but only 40% of Chinese kids actually go to high school. The rest either go to vocational high school or just become a low-skill worker. So the government is exploring whether to increase to 12 years, or actually 11 years in China, because the high school is 3 years in China, a typical China. So I think we should see some of the movements in there. But again, Chinese policies are very, very slow moving in the beginning. And I think the market may be a little bit disappointed in terms of the high expectation of this economy meeting to give bold policies. On the other hand, today the market, at least the overseas market, responded positively because of the 10 basis points rate cut, even though last night local market didn't really respond positively. I think the local market generally is a little bit more pessimistic on the immediate effect, mainly because lowering interest rate right now, the marginal effect it's not zero, but it's not that high, because right now many Chinese, it's just very low to take on debt. They want to put in ultra safe, like a government treasuries or government bonds. And that's why the PBOC was trying to pop up the price of those, try to, kind of increase the yield of the long-term rate. It wants to have some kind of the yield control, have a positive sloping yield curve. So it's actually trying to sell into the government bonds market to pop up the yield a little bit for the long-term rates, so, which is understands counterintuitive again for a typical person who's familiar with the U.S. monetary policy. But as our previous episode explained, it's actually not hard to predict and understand that that's the situation in China. So I don't think we should expect drastic monetary easing in China. Now, how to going forward? I think right now, the government, again, the baseline is still going to do a little bit something and then wait or endure. The Chinese word, I mentioned it before, it's kind of out. You endure through it and you wait until U.S. Started cutting rates, and then the pressure on the currency, on the Chinese currency is less, then the China's central bank can start cutting a little bit more. Because China's central bank usually cuts by 10 basis points. U.S. goes by 25 basis points. So if U.S. cuts 25 basis points, then China can quite, I would say, possible to match another 10 basis points to go with it. So without impacting China's exchange rate. So again, exchange rate stability is the number one KPI by the Central Bank of China. So unless they felt they could achieve the exchange rate stability, they are unlikely to to continue to cut the rates. So that's the significant, I think, background of this third plenum meeting. Obviously, I think in the next you will start seeing even more details, and then to see how it's going to be implemented. The process is going to be extremely slow and exploratory. If people not familiar with how these kind of policies, just thinking back on China's one-child policy. More than 10 years ago, there were already experts saying that, China really need to get rid of the one-child policy. People are not having kids, but it takes years and years for the government to finally get rid of that. So again, 5 years, 10 years in China's policy space is considered norm, but only when the government felt like it completely, essentially now the government is finally completely convinced that, people really don't want to have kids. So now in China, even though on paper it says you cannot have more than three kids, but in reality, you are not going to be fined anymore. So again, that's also typical that some of the laws are there, but the government is not enforcing it. So that is also part of the policy process. So hopefully these are useful, I think, for the next step for China. Again, I think the baseline is this, we wouldn't be too negative on China because the government is still doing something, but not to expect dramatic the sense of urgent reforms. That's just not the way things like policies work in China. If you are interested, you could read up, some of the third plenum meetings over the years, and the communique and the resolution. It kind of shows how China really, how the economic and political policies got made in China. And thank you. We'll bring more about what's coming next in China.